magnetize your minis, flight stands, custom kits, and all the hobby supplies you'll need from themagnetbaron.com.
Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for Craftworld, I'm Brent, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the new Aeldari Armored Warhost detachment that dropped yesterday for free on the Warhammer community page as part of the Grotmas calendar. And I will link the detachment in the video description. If you've not already taken a look, you can go download it from the Warhammer community site. And this kind of free content is always exciting. In this video, I'm going to go through all of the elements of the detachment, the overall rule, the enhancements, the stratagems, talk about how they interact with the army as it currently stands, while speculating a little bit about how that might change when we get our new codex. We know, for example, that the core faction ability for Aeldari is going to change from Fate Dice to something called Battle Focus. I dropped a video yesterday about Battle Focus and elements of that video. Some of the speculation in that video is already out of date with this new reveal. But we do know that the new Armored Warhost detachment will behave one way between now and the Codex drop, and then obviously when we get a bunch of rules changes, the reality of it, boots on the ground, will be a little bit different. But of course, this is a detachment that will favor having relatively few boots on the ground. Let's take a look. Okay, so the detachment ability itself is narrowly focused on vehicle units, and it provides one bonus to all units with the vehicle keyword, and then another bonus, additional bonus to vehicle units that also have the fly keyword. So it allows all units with the vehicle keyword to gain the assault keyword to all of their ranged weapons during the shooting phase. Actually, at all times. It just only matters during the shooting phase. So this is very powerful. This means that you can make advanced moves with your Warwalkers and your Vipers and theoretically your Fire Prisms, although there are reasons to not love Fire Prisms in this list. Your Falcons, and still shoot with all of your weapons. Most notably, you can now make advanced moves with D-cannon platforms, which are very slow in this edition, more so than in other editions, and were really only limited by their mobility. So D-cannons are significantly better with this. And then any unit that has the fly keyword can also reroll its advance moves. So units that are both vehicle units and have the fly keyword, so most of them, not Warwalkers, not D-cannon platforms, but most of them, will not only be able to advance and shoot, but also reroll that advance die. So our vehicles in this detachment are a lot faster. They're just faster. They're more maneuverable. That's their thing. And all of the enhancements and stratagems are also in some way relatively narrowly focused on vehicles. Now, I do just want to start by saying this kind of narrow focus, a detachment ability and a set of bonuses that really only benefit one particular subset of units. These are not my favorite types of detachments. I like detachments that are a little bit more flexible. It makes sense, right, for certain detachments to benefit certain units more than others, but when they sort of like narrowly benefit kind of like one kind of unit, that often makes them a little bit more limiting in playstyle. But that's the kind of thing we've seen in the Grotmas calendar. They've been these like very focused, very sort of niche-y drops. I will say that this puts to bed, I dropped a video in which I talked about things that I expect might be in the Codex. I did some speculation also after the recent reveal video about Aspect Warriors and some other aspects of the Codex. That we know that there are 8 detachments that are going to be available to us, maybe 7 in the Codex plus this one. Maybe this one will also be in the Codex, but it looks like they're going to be 8. And previously it had looked like there'd be one for each of the 5 major craft worlds, and then a Harlequin one and a Ynnari one and like maybe a mystery one. And it looks like this is the mystery one. It also might be the case that the assumption that each of the other detachments will be focused on one of the craft worlds, like this has me thinking that maybe that's just not going to be the case. Maybe like craft world identity will become less important from a play perspective. We know that there's kind of an Ulthwé one And we know that there's a Wraith one, which is kind of going to be Eandon, but there's none of the 5 major craft worlds are a vehicle craft world. If there is a vehicle craft world, it's Imlock, which is one of the minor craft worlds, which nobody expected to have its own thing. So maybe it'll just be there's like a detachment for Wraiths and a detachment for Psychers and a detachment for Aspect Warriors and a detachment for Bikes, which is kind of going to be the same Han one, and so on. And some of those will line up with traditional craft worlds and some of those won't. I don't know. We'll find out. But this is a very narrowly focused option. That said, it does open up a somewhat different way to play elves from how we have been playing them, and having some of our cheaper vehicles performing some of the roles that had been performed by things like Swooping Hawks, which is neat. And I think it does lend itself to a playstyle which is going to be sort of fundamentally different from the way that the 2 or 3 playstyles that have been dominating competitive play. Even though I think, spoiler alert, I think that this, I could be wrong. Again, we're going to have to see it in the context of however the battle focus rule ends up looking and what changes to the Warhost detachment might come when we get our codex. But I don't think that this is going to be one of our most competitive options once we have the book. It certainly isn't right now, with access still to Fate dice for everybody and picking between this and the Warhost detachment. But who knows? Everything could be different when the codex drops next year and there are a bunch of other rules changes. But the ability to throw Bright Lances on things like Vipers and make advance moves with them and still shoot, or to make a scout move with your Warwalkers and then make an advance move with your Warwalkers with 2 Bright Lances and shoot, will make it really easy, I think, for Aeldari vehicleists to get beads, to get lines of sight on virtually anything in turn 1. Like, your opponent really won't be able to hide stuff. So you're going to have modestly durable, cheap vehicles that can spread out and help you with your scoring needs. And then theoretically, you're going to be able to sort of alpha strike an opponent by moving to get lines of sight and maybe making an advanced move with like a D-cannon platform and still shooting something in your opponent's backfield. And so your like first wave of damage dealing with this will be alpha strike, sort of cheap disposable vehicles and forward advancing indirect fire weapons, getting beads on stuff in your opponent's backfield. There'll be retaliation against those vehicles, which have opened themselves up to return fire. And then your second wave may be mechanized infantry. There's some stratagems that make mechanized infantry better. So I think that's going to be the overall play style for this. We'll look specifically at the other bonuses and advantages that lend themselves to that approach. Okay, let's look at the enhancements. So the first enhancement is called Guiding Presence. It's 25 points. You can only give it to an Aeldari Psyker model, and it allows that Aeldari Psyker model to choose one friendly Aeldari vehicle within 9 inches, which is pretty far away, which is cool. And until the end of phase, each time that model makes an attack, you add 1 to the hit roll. Now, 25 points is pretty expensive to be able to give vehicles +1 to hit. That's a lot. So I think it's only really going to work well used in combination with vehicles that have a pretty significant loadout. That is a lot of weapons, or things that hit super hard. I see 2 different ways to use this, broadly speaking. I think the first and the more obvious one is to throw it on an incredibly potent, super heavy tank to maximize its shooting. So on this model, you would have either like a Foot Warlock with this ability. I do like that you can give this to a Foot Warlock, or a Farseer with this ability, a Foot Farseer, following around a super heavy tank, either a Cobra or a Scorpion, and making their monstrously hard-hitting weapons that would normally hit on 3s, hit on 2s, and then they've got some other weapons too, like they can have like a Bright Lance or extra stuff. But the D Impaler is vicious, and the Scorpion twin-length weapon, I feel like it's like strength 18, flat 5. Like they're really hard-hitting weapons, and they have 24 wounds. So in a vehicle-heavy list, theoretically a detachment that's all about vehicles, you could have some super heavy tank anchoring everything. And there's a way to do this such that it has synergy with one of the other enhancements that we're going to talk about later, where you get to like have one of your Psykers heal a tank for D3 models and get lone operative, or D3 wounds and get lone operative. So you might have like a warlock guiding the tank and a farseer following it around and healing it, and the warlock could stay totally out of line of sight behind it. And I think that might be okay, except of course that's so many points, and those tanks aren't amazing really to start with. They have huge footprints. This kind of build, I'll talk about this later, does have in its favor that because you're going to have a lot of vehicles in a list like this, if your opponent did want to try to concentrate on removing your super heavy tank, they would probably have to ignore all of your other vehicles. So it creates the sort of target saturation you might want, but I still think it's a bit of a stretch. The other option for this one is to have a psyker who's like a floater, who every turn is going to throw the +1 to hit on a different vehicle. So maybe like turn 1, you throw it on a warwalker that's going to like zip out and get a beat or an angle, and then it's going to die. And then your next turn, maybe it's on a D cannon that's making an advance move and shooting something in the open, because a D cannon that hits on a 2 in the open is amazing. I had a brief moment where I was like, ooh, this could be so good on D cannons, but then someone reminded me that you can never hit on better than a 4-up with indirect since one of the rules updates, so that's out. But shooting something in the open with a D cannon, could be good, and in your follow-up turns, throwing it on like a falcon. But you need to be doing it for like consistently 3 or 4 turns of the game for that 25 points to even maybe be a reasonable expense. But I'm super skeptical about the cost of this one, to be honest. The second option is Harmonization Matrix. It's Aeldari model only in your command phase if the bearer or any transport it is embarked in, I like that, is within range of an objective marker you control. You roll a d6 on a 3+, you get 1 CP. Now, the game rules specify that you're only able to get 1 additional CP per battle round. So if you already have an Autarch in your list, you don't need this. 30 points is really expensive. You probably want an Autarch Wayleaper anyway, or not. But I don't know. I'm not super impressed with this. What I like best about this is that it works even while you're in the transport, because I have long thought that this should be a rule. There's certain bonuses that some characters have that ought to apply even if they're in the vehicle, not physically on the map yet. And so I like seeing those kinds of rules because I think that's neat. But at 30 points, I just think that's a lot of points to pay. There are other ways to get CP, and one of the most obvious ones is to just make an Autarch your warlord, and currently that's like a really tempting and desirable thing to do. And there's nothing in this list that makes me really want to make some non-Autarch model my warlord, although I will say that both versions of the Farseer have good synergy. The ability to put either Fortune or Guide on a big, hard-hitting tank is obviously very good and would help with some kind of Alpha Strike strategy. So, maybe this is like a way to make a Farseer your warlord instead. But I'm skeptical of the cost. All right, the Spirit Stone of Raylith. This one's 20 points. You can only give it to a Psyker, and it does 2 things. While the Psyker is within 3 inches of an Aeldari vehicle, the Psyker gets Lone Operative, which is great. And there are a whole bunch of other units in the game that have an ability like this. I think the Chaos Space Marine Warpsmith has an ability like this, where they're only Lone Ops when they're fixing vehicles. And the other thing that the artifact does is it lets that Psyker fix vehicles. So you can heal D3 lost wounds in your command phase to a damaged vehicle. And again, if you are going to run some super tank like the Cobra or the Scorpion, and you wanted to run it around next to something like a backfield Foot Farseer that was maybe going to throw Fortune on it and also heal it, that could work reasonably okay. There's no shoot and scoot power available to the Armored Warhost. So currently one of the ways in which it doesn't compare very favorably with the regular Warhost is that Phantasm and Fire and Fade are so powerful, and the ability to use Fire and Fade on things like a pair of Fire Prisms to keep them alive is big. That said, if the battle focus ability we get in the Codex does allow your big vehicles to shoot and scoot, then maybe something like this on a Cobra would, or a Scorpion would potentially have some play. It's also, of course, possible that Battle Focus won't let us shoot and scoot. And if your Cobra or your Scorpion or your big super heavy tank that you've decided to buff in various ways and make the anchor of your list is going to be hanging out in your back line next to your Foot Farseer, the ability to throw Fortune on it every turn and heal it, and have your Farseer be untargetable would certainly be valuable. I will say that once regular Farseers, once we don't have access to Fate Dice anymore, because Fate Dice is going to go from being an overall faction ability to an ability only usable by the Seer Council detachment, like the Oathway detachment, that's going to change the relative value of Farseers. Currently, the ability to use your Farseers to manipulate your Fate Dice makes them basically an auto-include. I'm assuming that Farseers will get some new ability. Maybe they'll get a second psychic power to offset that loss. So maybe, right, there's some synergy here, again, with a super heavy tank. I do worry that a super heavy tank anchoring the list that needs to be poking out to see the opponent's army is going to be such a tempting target that, like, I don't know. I think even though they have 24 wounds, Cobras and Scorpions are pretty destroyable. But with Fortune and the ability to heal, maybe less so. So maybe there is some synergy here. One advantage to having a super heavy tank that becomes like a gun magnet for your opponent is then all those other vehicles in your list, which want to be targeted by the same kinds of weapon, might end up getting left alone. So maybe the anchor super tank might have some special viability simply because it forces your opponent to choose what they're going to target your armor with, and they're going to have a limited number of weapons that are effective into armor. And if you're running this detachment, you're going to be showing them a lot of armor. Like, you're not going to be. This is not a detachment that wants to keep its head down and chip away at the opponent and then make a big play on turn 3. This really is. I really think that this is an alpha strike. I'm going to overwhelm you with my armor and destroy your armor before you can respond to it. Kind of army. And so maybe this enhancement really makes that overall approach work better, and at 20 points it's not totally unreasonable. I also like that you can throw it on a Warlock if you wanted to. I think the Foot Farseer is the most obvious pick because you get that like Fortune synergy. It's going to be important. But I like the idea of powers that queue off of something nearby with the Psyker keyword. I think that having a lot of units that could do that would be one of the ways to make Warlocks viable. They really haven't been in this edition because they only give bonuses to the units that they're leading. I'd like them to just be able to work the way Farseers do, where you pick a unit and you give a bonus. But if they do continue to work such that their psychic power or whatever only benefits the unit that they're leading, having other data cards that benefit from having a nearby Psyker might solve the Warlock problem. And this is evidence that GW is at least thinking that way, and in some respect with reference to Aeldari. All right. Last of the new enhancements, Guileful Strategist. This one is kind of mid, but it's only 15 points, which makes it kind of like very hard to pass up. Here's what it does. Any Aeldari HQ model, if your army includes the Bearer after both players have deployed their armies, select up to 3 Aeldari vehicle units from your army and redeploy them. When doing so, any of those units can be placed into strategic reserves regardless of how many units are already in strategic reserves. And what's cool about this is that you get to force your opponent to respond to a particular deployment, and then the ability to just pick those vehicles up and put them somewhere else or into strategic reserve. If they go into a strategic reserve, that like eliminates some of your Alpha Strike option depending on what vehicles you put in. But the ability to simply move them could be good, especially in long edge deployment, right? Where like you're deploying along the long edge of the table, so there's a lot of places vehicles can be. I do think in practice this one might be a little bit less useful than it seems on a lot of boards, because often you want to put your stuff kind of behind terrain, and if you've got a bunch of vehicles, they've got big footprints and there are only so many places you can put them. So, it's kind of like maybe it was kind of obvious where your vehicles were going to be anyway. And you could have just started them in strategic reserve if that's what you wanted to do. So I think this is good. I think it's so cheap that it's going to be tempting to take it often. But I also think that like it's not. it's not as amazing as it would be if you could do it after we know who's going first. All right, let's look at the stratagems. Of these, I really like. I do think that the ability to repair a vehicle that you're also throwing fortune on that's anchoring your list might work really well for this particular build, but I don't think any of the enhancements are auto takes necessarily. All right, let's look at the stratagems. The first one is Layered Wards. It's 1 CP. You use it in any phase of the game after mortal wounds have been allocated to one of your vehicles, and you get a 5-up save against those mortal wounds. For me, this one is a big miss. It makes your vehicles robust against stuff like vehicle shock and the grenade stratagem, which is cool. But I'm just not. I don't find myself losing a lot of vehicles to mortal wounds, and because the whole shtick of this particular detachment is vehicles, I really think this could have been give a vehicle a 5-up feel no pain instead of a feel no pain only against mortals, and I think that would have been fine. It almost seems like maybe that was the original plan, and then they swerved at the last moment. They worried that it was OP, and I really don't think it would have been. This is very situational. I can certainly imagine 1 in 7 games, maybe I'll be like, oh, I should use Layered Wards, but it's, I think it's not really a thing. Swift Deployment. This one's cool. 1 Aeldari transport unit from your army. You use it in your movement phase. Until the end of the phase, units can disembark from your transport after that transport has advanced. Units that do so count as having made a normal move that phase and cannot declare a charge in the same turn, but can otherwise act normally. So this really, unless you're running Harlequins, and the Harlequin transport would not work well for this. This means that I guess you could use it if you're running Ynnari. I guess you could use it with Drakari transport, but I'm not going to speak to that. The Falcon and the Wave Serpent really are the only candidates here. So you get to use the cool detachment ability to advance with your Falcon. You can go really far and have your fire dragons jump out 3 inches, and they count as having moved. So you're not now moving. But blast something with their fusion weapons and be in Melta range, like that's the thing. And this is what I say, like when I say I think that the way this list wants to play is you have like an alpha strike with your quick disposable vehicles on turn 1 and your indirect fire weapons to pick up your a bunch of your opponent's armor, and then you've got like a second wave of mechanized infantry. Having those fire dragons in the second wave of mechanized infantry could be good. I think that if you have enough like hard target Elim in the other vehicles in your list, you might even consider doing this with some kind of anti-infantry infantry. Maybe you would think about doing it with something like Dire Avengers led by Azerman. Maybe this is a crazy way to use Mogan Ra and some Dark Reapers, because to really get the value out of Mogan Ra, he's got to also be able to enter melee. Like maybe this would be I'm going to get close with my Reapers kind of build. I don't even know. I haven't really thought that hard about it because this has just come out yesterday. But I think that I certainly think Swift Deployment has teeth. It's scary. I wouldn't want to play into it. Oh, and one more note about Swift Deployment. It potentially has the ability to be really helpful with secondary scoring, because those units that jump out of the transport, even though the transport advanced, don't count as having made an advanced move themselves. They've made a normal move. So you could make an advanced move with a Wave Serpent or a Falcon and jump out with some Dire Avengers 3 inches from the Falcon and have them do the thing. So you make an advance move with a tank that's pretty quick. You get to re-roll the advance roll, and then you jump out a further 3 inches with something like Dire Avengers. That makes it a lot easier to get action-based secondaries done, especially the ones that let you score big for being somewhere like an opponent's deployment zone. Potentially that could be a powerful scoring tool. The third option is Vectored Engines. This is also 1 CP, and it simply allows one of your vehicles in melee to fall back and still shoot. This detachment absolutely needed a stratagem like this, because one of the ways to deal with this is going to be to tag your vehicles in melee to give them penalties to hit. So being able to fall back and shoot is really important. It's certainly very space elfy. It is a little bit annoying that it's just objectively worse than Feigned Retreat, which is also 1 CP, and the Warhost detachment, which is arguably a stronger detachment overall. But like, it's good. You'll use it. And honestly, you're not really losing out with Feigned Retreat, because most of the stuff that would want to fall back and shoot, you're mostly going to have vehicles in your list anyway, and vehicles don't love melee. So falling back and shooting is more, I mean, mostly that's what you would do if you had access to Feigned Retreat instead. But it certainly would be cool if you could, fall back with your infantry and shoot and still charge. That would be neat. But Vectored Engines, you'll use it if you play this. Cloud Strike. This is also 1 CP. This one's cool. Start of the reinforcement step of your movement phase, one Aeldari vehicle from your army that has the fly keyword can go into strategic reserve. So you then get to bring this thing out as a 6-inch deep striker. So for 1 CP, any one of your vehicles before the game begins can get deep strike. That's just in and of itself, that's very good. Can get a 6-inch deep strike. Ooh, that's even better. And then just to sweeten the pot, if your unit is a transport, when you bring it out of deep strike, the units embarked in it can also jump out and can also shoot, but they can't declare a charge. But they also get a 6-inch deep strike. So you could bring in a falcon full of fire dragons and jump out and shoot, and at least the fire pike would have the Melta keyword and do some damage. And it's hard to screen out 6-inch deep strikers. I will say it's less hard to screen out 6-inch deep strikers when all you have to do is screen out like an entire tank chassis and the troops getting out of it. You're probably not going to be bringing this in your opponent's backfield, but you may be able to bring it in the midfield. This is another one of those abilities that allows the mechanized infantry to be your follow-up hit. So like your first hammer blow is I spread out and get a bunch of angles on you and light up your anti-armor with bright lances, and then in turns 2 and 3, I'm like hammering you with mechanized infantry. Again, it doesn't have to be fire dragons. Maybe this is Dire Avengers and Azurmen pouring out some anti-infantry fire. That could be cool too. But this is certainly a powerful ability. Deep strike is always the ability to like use deep strike on any vehicle unit is powerful. Objectively, it's powerful. Also, like the swift deployment stratagem, Cloud Strike potentially can really help with secondaries. They might enable you to get a unit onto the board in some place where you need to score based on some sort of like secondary action mechanic. So the sort of thing I imagine is like you bring in a Wave Serpent out of Deep Strike, and the Wave Serpent has a unit of, say, Fire Dragons in it, but also a unit of Dire Avengers. And maybe the turn you bring it in, the Fire Dragons deploy to shoot something, and the like Dire Avengers deploy on the other side of the transport, kind of behind a piece of terrain out of line of sight, and instead they're doing some action. And maybe that's happening in some part of the board that would otherwise be hard to get to. I think you're still going to want other types of units for secondary scoring, but I do think that this is potentially a powerful tool in your arsenal to minimize the number of action monkey units you need, or to reduce the number of action monkey units you might otherwise want. Okay, Soul Sight. You use it in your shooting phase, one Aeldari vehicle in your army that has not been selected to shoot this phase until the end of phase. Each time your unit is selected to shoot, you can reroll one hit roll, one wound roll, and one damage roll made for a model in your unit. If you're using fast dice rolling, you can select one of those rolls to reroll before moving into the next step of the attack sequence, which I think means you get to roll the dice and then re-roll. But in any event, this is cool, and it helps address one of the biggest frustrations we might have looking at this detachment as an option. So imagine that you are an Imlock player. This is your thing. You love Aeldari vehicles, and that's how you paint your models, and that's your craft world, and you want to run a vehicle-heavy army. It might be frustrating to look at the Warhost detachment ability and be like, man, I like that my vehicles get extra mobility if I choose the Armored Warhost. But like, on the other hand, if I just chose the regular Warhost, all of my vehicles would have better shooting. They'd all just hit a lot harder. So vehicles are actually better in the not all vehicle detachment, and that's just frustrating and disheartening. And this is a problem we've seen in previous editions. Back in 9th edition, the Sam Han detachment gave you worse jet bikes than like 2 of the other detachments that were not focused on jet bikes, which is just the biggest, like the most deflating thing for speedy bike elf players. And so I think the whole notion of this is that it's going to help balance out the loss that would come from. So you can pick at least like one of your vehicles and give them the equivalent bonus that they would have if, or an almost equivalent bonus to the one that they would have if they were playing the regular Warhost detachment. And then maybe some other vehicle is getting +1 to hit from a psyker with an HQ model with an enhancement, and some of them don't get the bonus, but they sure do get extra lines of sight, and it all kind of balances out. And I think that's the idea. I will say that if there are no changes to the Warhost detachment when we get our codex, like if it continues to be a reroll to hit and a reroll to wound for everybody, I think that maybe this does not go far enough in balancing out that loss to the vehicle heavy option. But I will say that if you choose to play the Armored Warhost, I think that you will use Soul Sight multiple times in every game you play. It will be very valuable. And again, if we're thinking of the primary advantage of this type of build is being like an alpha strike that cripples your opponent's ability to deal with the types of units that this list wants to run, then Soul Sight's going to help with that. It's going to help with that in a big way. Okay, last one, anti-grav repulsion. This gives your vehicles some play against aggressive melee armies. So you use it in your opponent's charge phase. After your opponent declares a charge on one of your vehicles, it has to have the fly keyword, and you say -2 to your charge for 1 CP. This is very situational. You're probably going to use it once in every 3 to 4 games you play at most. But when you use it, it's one of those stratagems that could totally change the direction of a particular turn, or maybe even the outcome of a game. Maybe, it's good. But I think the big wins here, Soul Sight, that's going to be one we lean into. I think Cloud Strike, honestly, I think that's going to be one that we lean into. Quite possibly Swift Deployment. Vectored Engine, the other ones are going to be situational. When you might find yourself using Vectored Engines and the anti-grav thing against heavy melee lists, and on other games you're not going to use it at all. But you're not going to be spending CP re-rolling advance rolls, and so that, I guess that's also an advantage to playing the Armored Warhost. You have more CP for these other stratagems. If I were building an Armored Warhost detachment right now, I think I would definitely want 2 or 3 Vipers. I would definitely want 2 or 3 Warwalkers. I think I would experiment with anchoring the list with a big super heavy tank. I think the Lynx doesn't really get there. As it's nice that it's cheap. I think it's only 180 points, but the Lynx Pulsar is just not that good. There's an argument for considering Void Weavers. I think Hornets would be very good in this list. I'm also not sure that Hornets are still going to exist when our Codex drops, so don't buy any because they're Forge World. I would absolutely include 1 or 2 D cannons. And I might even mess around with that Crimson Hunter. I think Falcons with infantry, great, include in this. And honestly, the Wave Serpent. The ability to deep strike a Wave Serpent and have 2 different units in there that can jump out and shoot, maybe a unit of Fire Dragons and a unit of Dire Avengers. You could have both of them led by their Phoenix Lord, and then get really aggressive in your opponent's backfield. Because Armored Warhost is so alpha striking and aggressive, it's probably going to have good synergy with the Yin Karn, because you're going to be losing units that are more or less right on top of your opponent, and the ability to like lose one of your units right on top of your opponent and bring in the big bad Aeldari, God of Death, and get into melee in your opponent's backfield could be really good. I think the sort of ironic loser in this whole thing is, I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the Fire Prism, which is supposed to be like the signature Aeldari target elimination tank The double fire prism combo where you move one fire prism into line of sight and you can shoot from the, like, both fire prisms can shoot from the POV of the one prism, and then you fire and fade it out of sight. That's like the only way to play fire prisms. They're not durable enough. Even if you throw fortune on one and have a psyker stand next to it to heal it, like, any competitive opponent's arm, any opponent with a competitive army will be able to destroy that fire prism on turn one. So I think weirdly prisms don't, and fire prisms are just too expensive for that kind of trading, I think. So I don't think that fire prisms have great synergy here. It's not terrible. It's just not, I wouldn't do it. I think you might be able to mess around with night spinners. Again, like with the D cannon, the ability to give a night spinner +1 to hit with its indirect fire might make it worth considering. And you'd want to make sure that you, because a lot of our vehicle loadouts are very anti-hard target oriented, you'd want to make sure you have enough infantry elimination also. Even though they don't have the vehicle keyword, I would still consider having things like Shroud Runners in a list like this, because they're cheap action, well, cheap by Aeldari standards. They're action monkeys that you can use to help you score secondaries. It's going to be tough to hide everything in your backfield if you have a lot of vehicles. So stuff that can scout is good because it can run out of the backfield and hide behind terrain in the midfield before the game begins. And the loadouts on Shroud Runners are very anti-infantry oriented. 18 scatter laser shots and 3 sniper shots are good, as is the ability to give lethal hits against other targets, although that's going to be less important in lists with a lot of really good vehicle weapons, which hit hard enough anyway that lethal hits is maybe less essential. You're probably still going to want some infantry units that are quick and can do actions, because even though Armored Warhost lets you advance and still shoot, the Pariah Nexus rules prevent you from doing an action after you advance. So it's still going to be useful to have things like some Swooping Hawks to use Skyleap to jump around the board and do actions. That's another reason to have some Shroud Runners. So I would certainly want like 2 or 3 relatively inexpensive, also quick action monkey options. But I would construct the whole list around the notion that I'm going to cripple my opponent out of the gate in the first 2 turns, instead of the way that I typically play Aeldari, which is to keep my head down and pick away at the opponent and then make a big play and then score big in the late game. And this is going to work against some lists and not against others. But I think my favorite thing about this new detachment is that it's not just like different rules for the way we're playing now. It will encourage a different play style. Encouraging vehicles is not especially exciting because the first half of 10th edition was so vehicle heavy anyway that if anything, it's been infantry who have been trying to find extra ways to be useful. So whatever. But in terms of the play style, I really do think this lends itself to something a bit different, and I think that's really cool. Oh, the other unit that I think is a big loser in this detachment is jet bikes. I think jet bikes bikes are fragile, so that big blob of bikes, you could have like small units to help you do secondaries and have some shuriken cannons or whatever at 80 points, that's fine. But the big blob of bikes led by the Farseer Skyrunner, I think really relies on having access to fire and fade. So even though this could be theoretically like a few boots or no boots on the ground kind of list, I don't think it likes bikes. That said, if our codex drops and battle focus is a universal shoot and scoot power that applies to everything, then all bets are off. Then there are going to be all sorts of other ways to be clever with this, where you make the advance move, you shoot at your opponent, but then you scoot out of line of sight. I assume that battle focus won't. If that's how it works, it won't work on units that have advanced. But man, if it does, this could be crazy. But that is not how I think things will unfold. Okay, that's what I've got. If you have your own ideas about how to use the new Armored Warhost detachment effectively and what sorts of units might be best and how you might go about building a list, please leave those ideas in the comments below. If you haven't read James Kelling's article, Boone's article over on Goonhammer about this detachment. He got to see it early because he's special. I would encourage you to read his thoughts. He was able to drop his same day because he had early access. But he's been a guest on the channel a couple of times, and he's over on the Discord, and he's very insightful. And maybe I'll also link that in the video description. Okay, thanks everybody, and a special thanks to my patrons. If you are interested in joining our Discord and being a patron, I will also link that in the video description. You get early access to some content and the opportunity to yap about all of this stuff with like-minded elf enthusiasts. And as always, a special thanks to the Magnet Baron, who's been an amazing sponsor for this chapter, this chapter. We're Space Marines now, for a couple of years now, and I appreciate you, Constantine. Okay, that's it. Back again soon with something new. Until then, good luck in your next campaign with some extra Space Elf vehicles. Bye.